Is it 1 o'clock?
Just a little bit after, 1 minute after.
All right.
You want to wait another 3 or 4 minutes to have people come in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But welcoming these wonderful people. Ooh.
It's a
Good
beautiful.
morning, everybody. Welcome to the March 4th, 2024 chapter meeting. I'm going to be turning the chair of the meeting over to our Vice President, Diane Mena, because my voice gives out after about 30 seconds of talking. So Diane is going to chair the meeting, and in a few minutes, Joan will introduce the speakers and call on you for Q&A and discussion.
I just think I just got a promotion to vice president, vice chair.
Vice Chair.
God forbid. Vice president.
No, it sounds pretty good, but God forbid. And is Cecilia here? Because Cecilia is taking the notes.
I saw her come in.
Okay.
And this is Freddie. He's going to be our vice chair.
Freddie travels with Diane.
We always see his tail.
Just the tail, usually.
I think I need a Freddie.
Yeah, I think you do too.
Yeah.
You're right then.
Well, we're going to be over 100 people soon, so we could probably start.
Okie doke. Go ahead, Joan. Hit it.
Are you going to say something about the meeting first?
Yes, if you see on your screen, Bonnie has shared with us. We have the opening and welcome. And then we have the speakers, who Joan will introduce to us. And after that, we'll have Q&A, which Joan is gracious enough to call on people for us. And then Debbie will be here with the health and safety, health and safety, healthcare update. I'm so used to health and safety, right, Joan? The healthcare update, which won't be very extensive because not much is happening at the moment. And then we'll have announcements at the end. I think Marcia wants to do a brief announcement about the working theater as well. I don't see her yet, but she'll come along soon.
And we can announce the topic for April.
Okay.
The date.
So go ahead, Joni. It's up to you.
Okay. So welcome everyone. And we're going to have a really comfortable conversation with Sarah and Meredith today to take us through the forest of AI. I know some people are really nervous about this hype that it's going to kill the world or, make us all wonderful. But they're going to lead us through this forest and show us the trees that divert us from really understanding it. And they're going to do it through a conversation with each other. And then I'd like to introduce them. I'm going to introduce Sarah first. And this is brief because I think you've seen their long resumes. And if not, they're such fascinating people. You're going to want to look them up later again. So Sarah Myers West, Dr. Myers West, Sarah, sorry, is really known for her critical examination of the politics of AI, the political economy. She has numerous journal articles, and her research has been Wall Street Journal. It's appeared in Washington Post, PBS, etc. Her doctorate is in communication and journalism, and that gives her a wonderful foundation, but she also has it to debug, to really demystify all of the terms that are used and talk about it in plain language. She is currently now the managing director of AI Now, and she was a senior research fellow at the Federal Trade Commission And as you all know, we need people in agencies who can understand things and not ask too many ridiculous questions. I want to give full disclosure before I introduce Meredith, which is that I know Sarah and Meredith because I was a visiting scholar at AI Now before the pandemic. And so I got to know them, their research, and their enthusiasm for what they do. So Meredith Whitaker, in some circles, needs no introduction at all. Those of you who met her several years ago when she talked to us, she is known as one of the co-initiators of the Google walkout in 2018. And she resigned from there, but has been threatened by them afterwards and since. There were 20,000 people that walked out. Is that right, Meredith? Worldwide? Yeah, pretty amazing. Pretty fantastic work. Meredith is the president of the Signal Foundation, and Signal is a nonprofit messaging and private message service that really, really respects.
Uh-oh,
We,
Joan has frozen.
if you're interested.
Joan,
What?
you're freezing a little bit.
I may have to move into another room.
Okay.
So let me just finish this introduction and put them on the screen. I'm in a far room from the router in my apartment. So yeah, I think that's it. I think these are two of the best people I could think of in the world to demystify for us.
Oh, we lost her again. So I guess, Tara, you're up first.
Right.
All right, you froze.
Sarah's up first.
Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
And Meredith. And I'm gonna reconnect.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Joan. And I mean, really, thank you all for having us. Like, it's a great pleasure and an honor. And like, this is a particularly well-timed moment to be sort of taking a step back and thinking through what was a remarkable moment of a like hype cycle around artificial intelligence over the last year. And you know, in thinking this through, Mare and I decided one of the best ways to kind of unpacking hype is not to necessarily like get into presenter mode, but to have a conversation where we're going to engage with the ideas. And you know, Mare, this is not the first time that we've had conversations around trying to unpack what it is, like what is AI, what's embedded in that term, how does that term get imbued with a set of logics and idea, like, you know, it's a sense of inevitability that doesn't necessarily, you know, bear out when you look at the technology more materially. And, you know, as we're in the throes of yet another AI moment, we're at risk of forgetting that in many ways we've been here before. And even worse, you know, at this moment, we risk walking back so much of the progress that we've made in challenging assumptions and narratives that serve best those who build this tech, often at the expense of those who are rendered subject to it. So I thought just to kick things off, we could start with a table setting question. Which is, how should we understand AI?
Yeah, Sarah, thank you for teeing that up. And I think I want to move into the part that I'm going to focus on here, which is this kind of historical overview of what do we mean when we talk about this term, with a caveat. And that caveat is that most of what we know about computational technology, at least over the last 3 or so decades, has been written by the marketing departments of a handful of private companies. So we're going to have to do some clearing of the thicket with a machete if we're going to really understand what we're talking about and recognize that everyone on this call, and indeed most people who sort of, you know, engage with the world cognitively at all, can understand this. This is not, hyper sophisticated in terms of the basic premise. Now, matrix math may be hyper sophisticated, but that's not really what we're talking about. That's a mechanism by which we build the things we're talking about, and the things we're talking about themselves, not hugely complicated. So I want you all to sort of ground into that, because all of the hype and rhetoric we are fed, whether it be by news media or directly through company press releases, or simply the framing that is used when we talk about this, is meant, in my view, implicitly or intentionally, to make us feel a bit of intellectual doubt and even shame, and to assume that we ourselves as mere mortals aren't up to the task of really examining, interrogating, and governing this technology. So let's make that the table setting, and now I will move forward into the substance of what I have to say, which is basically to draw out this question: what is AI? Right? What is AI? Artificial intelligence, it's a term, right? Well, if we look historically, that term was coined in 1956 by the cognitive and computer scientist, John McCarthy. He's named as one of the fathers of AI, and yeah, he made up the term, so I guess that's what a father does. And why did he coin AI in 1956? Well, he wanted grant money, particularly US military grant money. And as academics may be familiar with, a flashy term will attract funders, right? And he wanted to attract funders to fund a summer workshop. He also, as academics may be familiar, was engaged in some petty turf claiming contra Norbert Wiener, who coined the term cybernetics. He, put flatly, did not want to invite Norbert to his party, nor did he want to be subtended to Norbert's term. He didn't want to build cybernetics, which Norbert was the father of. He wanted to build artificial intelligence, which he was the father of. So these are the two rationales given by McCarthy himself in subsequent interviews for why he coined the term artificial intelligence in 1956. One more note: it was in the mid-40s that the architectures for neural networks were first theorized and experimented with. So here we have something pretty important. The technological affordances and methods were actually being developed about a decade before the term was coined. And over the lifetime of the term, artificial intelligence has been applied to a heterogeneous mix of technological approaches, including neural nets, but also including expert systems and other methods that bear very, very little resemblance to each other. So it connotes more an aspiration and potentially a desire for certain strains of grant funding, or to be sort of included in a certain moment, than it does a technological set of practices. This is not a technological term of art then or now. It should be understood more clearly as a marketing term that has been applied to many things and is currently being applied to many things. Some of them that look slightly like neural networks, some of them that don't, some of them that are probably a spreadsheet formula, but we don't know that because the ability for companies to keep their code and their methods proprietary means that marketing does most of the heavy lifting and the actual techniques are generally hidden from view. So that's what artificial intelligence as a term is. Now, why now, right? This is the term is over 70 years old, and it, why did it emerge about 10 years ago, but with renewed force over the past year and a half to dominate computational tech as this sort of, apotheosis of the vision and future of computational technology? Well, we need to look to the 90s, and we need to look to what I have termed the surveillance business model of commercial technology to understand why artificial intelligence, this term, which imported a handful of old techniques, became so important recently. In the 90s, the Clinton administration and Democrats more generally kind of completed a process begun in the neoliberal 80s of changing their base and their interests from the white working class and unions to professional workers and high tech. This was the promise of economic prosperity. There are many places you can read in some of contemporaneous documentation where high tech or computational tech is visioned as a kind of new deal, a neoliberal new deal. So we don't need government, the social wage or, a redistributive agenda. What we need is to supercharge the high tech industry. And in particular, during the 90s, this vision was kind of concretized to focus on the internet or networked computation as the engine of economic prowess. This was going to turn the US around economically from stagnated manufacturing and a kind of slow decline into a economic juggernaut that could not only build interconnected networked commerce and services for people in the US, but the plan was dominate globally, become the standard setter and the technological powerhouse for networks globally. And sadly, happily, this kind of worked. The US set the standards for networked computation. We are still paying the price from some of those early sins, in my view. And importantly, did two things that are very important here. Put no restrictions on commercial surveillance. So a private industry can collect and create as much information as they want about you, your communities, your habits, your locations, etc., much more than the government can legally. So zero restrictions on private company surveillance. And not only were there no restrictions placed, and that remains true today, there's no federal privacy law to this date, they also endorsed advertising as the revenue stream for these new services. And this is important because, of course, advertising in the paradigm we're talking about impels more surveillance. To know your customer, you want to know more about them, to target them with things that they might add, click or buy or act on. You want to know the type of people who are click or buy on act on that. And even as the causal argument for this, that you can kind of shape people's behavior and sort of control their impulses or hijack their impulses in such a way may be a little shaky. Nonetheless, the endorsement of advertising as the revenue model for networked computation as it was being privatized during the Clinton era, and the lack of any guardrails on private surveillance set the stage for where we are now. And this, moving us into the 2000s, was what enabled the creation of the surveillance business model, which is, fairly simple. It's what Google does, it's what Meta does, it's what Amazon does, it's even what Microsoft does, although in more attenuated ways. They have one of the largest ad exchanges, they have, a massive browser, they have other services that also participate in the surveillance business model, which is you lure people to your platforms or services, you collect data on or about them, you use that to target them with advertisements or other, kind of influential content, and you sell the ability to target to types of people that are constructed via surveillance to advertisers and others who may wish to use those services. So that's the business model that emerged out of this sort of democratic-led push to privatize commercial computation, and found us in the 2000s and entering the 2010s with hyper powerful networked platforms like Google, like Meta, like others, who had huge amounts of data that they had collected about us, that they'd scraped from the web, that they had encouraged us to produce for them by offering photo sharing sites, status update feeds and all the rest, and who had, in addition to this data, of course, massive infrastructures, powerful servers and compute that were calibrated to create, store, process this data. Very few other entities in the world had this combination of resources. So how does this relate to AI? Well, it is fundamental to AI, and my argument in some of my scholarship is actually that AI emerged out of this configuration in the present form. So this is the basis on which the AI we're talking about is built. In 2012, there was a very influential paper that was published showing that techniques, AI techniques created in the late 1980s, could do newly powerful things when matched with sufficiently powerful computational power and huge amounts of data. So what really happened in 2012 and kind of set off this huge AI boom was a recognition that with the resources that a handful of surveillance tech companies possessed and few other did, you could reanimate old AI techniques. And you could do this very profitably to accomplish things like ad targeting, algorithmic engagement. So, based on an AI model, determining, what type of content is likely to keep people glued to their YouTube screen or glued to their Facebook. And this supercharged a narrative around artificial intelligence as the future of technology, and did a lot to leverage that term intelligence, which was sort of, again, John McCarthy created that more by happenstance than intention, and we know why, use that to imply that these data-centric and compute-centric techniques that only a handful of companies had the resources to produce at scale were an able replacement for almost any human function across our institutions and social lives. So this was a powerful market opening force and a powerful narrative that enabled companies to, I would say, double dip on resources they already had, on the surveillance data they were already collecting and creating, and on the infrastructures they were already powering and maintaining as the basis of their surveillance business model. And this is why I have called AI a surveillance derivative. It comes forth from this configuration, from this business model. It is not a result of scientific progress that saw significant advancements in quote unquote AI and thus sort of led people to pursue this. It is really, it emerges from this surveillance business model, and we need to be very careful about the narratives we tell about AI and about the kind of guileless willingness to follow that term intelligence down a path of trusting these computational mechanisms too greatly with significant determinations and other functions, while forgetting that these are emerging from for-profit companies that will always put the goal of revenue and growth above, whatever else, the social good, democratic deliberation, you name it. So Sarah, I'm going to leave it there with that high level historical overview, kind of bringing us to the present, and then hand it over to you to get into a little more granular detail around the kind of AI we're talking about now, ChatGPT, and the current moment of hype.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think that was a really brilliant overview. And I think particularly pointing to the continuities, as well as that sort of like flimsy, often like even just vibes based sort of like framing and bucketing of many very computational techniques, some of which are essentially like basic statistical methods run through computer-based interfaces, as AI, but that the rhetorical moves around AI enable it to sort of carry this larger cultural and political weight that justifies the use of this business model. And I'd also underscore Mayor's, in addition to the Mayor's scholarship looking at the sort of definitional space around artificial intelligence, she's also, I think, really usefully documented the way that the academic field of research in artificial intelligence has been, in many regards determined by the impetus of these large tech firms, that the horizon for research and what constitutes cutting edge research in AI has been scoped and shaped over the last decade by labs that exist within these big tech companies. So our constitutive vision of where AI is heading is already, scoped by the business models and the incentive structures of these big tech companies that run the resources needed to build AI. But if you think back historically, there are lots of different things that could be deemed AI, and we could also, think about a world where what counts as AI is determined differently, where we build AI differently. There's space for reconstruction. But I think we're Mayor brought us up to the present moment. And in thinking through, we've just experienced this tremendous moment of a lot of anxiety, a lot of attention to artificial intelligence in the last year, that in some ways continues this trajectory, but also in other ways departs from it. And in one of the ways, in particular, that it departs from that previous trajectory, and this came up in one of our prior conversations, Mayor, you pointed out that where AI historically has largely been a technology that is rendered invisible to most people. AI systems are, they're in our devices. There's things that, might determine, our like determinations about our healthcare, whether insurance is going to cover something, or what rate our mortgage is going to cost us, or, these things that are, they're systems that are used on us, not by us. And the different moment that we're in is that through generative AI systems, there are interfaces, APIs, things like ChatGPT, where you can enter a prompt and engage more in a more tangible and tactile way with artificial intelligence. And this change, I think, has created conditions for a different conversation about AI, because it's now something that, I think it broadens the conversation by making it more tactile. It also obfuscates the conversation by making it, much more of a gloss on, a set of infrastructures that are deeply material. You can think about, even things like the phrasing of the term cloud computing, and you need cloud computing to, run the data needed to produce, the responses to any prompt you enter in ChatGPT, or to, process the data in any kind of AI system. The cloud makes it feel as though it's very like ethereal and ephemeral, but there's real material. These are physical data centers that exist in communities around the US, around the world, that have significant material costs, like the toxic chemicals that are used in the production of the chips that are plugged into data centers, the energy cost of running these things, the strain on water resources to cool down the data centers. There's many different material dimensions to artificial intelligence that get dropped out through the rhetoric. And I think in the present moment, we're particularly at risk of losing that materiality at the same time that the technology feels more tangible than it ever has before. And so there's a tension there that I think is important to bring forward. To that point, I think one of the things that we need to continually be putting at the heart of the issue in the present moment is this presumption that AI is going to have inevitable effects, that it's, associated with innovation, that it's going to have, AI is going to do, this or that, or lead to this or that outcome. There have never been more, future casters, I think, that I come across in my day-to-day than I do right now. And often this neglects, looking under the hood at what is AI being used for in the first place. And when you do that look under the hood, I think despite these breezy associations between AI and innovation, often artificial intelligence as it's currently used out in the world serves two objective functions. One is it's frequently used to enact austerity measures. So it's used as sort of like an algorithm-based way of justifying decisions that are, rendered under the logic of efficiency, but are really designed to cut costs or to justify layoffs or to, lead to, just fundamentally the end goal is austerity. So that's one bucket of use cases. And then the second is, as I think was teed up at the start of this conversation, to ramp up control. It leads to the ability to render as data observations about social processes through surveillance. You can think about this in workplaces, for example, where you might have the production of new kinds of analytics that increase the amount of control that an employer has over their employee. This was also exacerbated by the shift to remote work during COVID, where we're all using our devices as a more of an interface. And as Mary noted too, those who profit are the companies that ultimately control the resources. Joe, I kind of want to kick it over to you, because as we know, there's nothing new under the sun, and these are exactly the same kinds of use cases that you encountered in your organizing decades ago, in your work studying AI in the workplace. And I'm curious for your sense of what you're seeing in this present moment, and to what extent you're seeing echoes of the past, or where you're seeing things that are novel here.
Yeah, that's an interesting set of questions. Yeah, I'm the dinosaur, and I remember the early days when this term popped up in the late 50s, really used in the 60s. And if we think about it, many of us here remember redlining by the banks. And that was essentially keeping mortgages out of the hands of people of color. And it was done through a very simple algorithm, right? That they would look at neighborhoods and mark them off. And that could be built into early computing. And it wasn't seen. And very importantly, for the tech workers I worked with, they didn't even know what they were doing. So I think that's one of the reasons, just to come back to two things that Meredith said. One is that unions are really needed to help the workers get together and say, what the hell are we building here? And the other was an epiphany I got, Meredith, from something that you said, that in the 80s, the models were there for making artificial intelligence, but not the data that all those big firms had calculated or gathered. And so in the 80s, I was working with a bunch of tech researchers who claimed that their identity was AI refugees. They had worked in this industry and they really wanted to build it for very good reasons, they claimed, but there wasn't the data to build it on, right? So, I mean, we do see, I saw back in the 60s, and we do see now that jobs are cut, right? That's the austerity. That's the in the name of efficiency. And that's the control. That, yeah, there could be low-wage jobs. Insurance companies, let's think about that. Those algorithms of who is denied have been built into the computer programs for a long time. And now when they're built broader into AI models, we don't see them. We complain, but we don't seem to have the power, and neither do the workers, to do anything about them. So, Sarah, that brings us back to what you were talking about, that how we actually get the power. Well, how we actually understand enough to be more proactive.
I mean, I think you're exactly right too, that not only do we not see them, but if this is an invisible infrastructure that's used on us, we can't see each other as easily either. And that, I think, is a very purposeful tactic that kind of inhibits the ability to effectively organize or to effectively push back against uses. Because so often, the places where AI gets used are places where there are existing power asymmetries that are just, invisibilized and then, made like increased through artificial intelligence, even if the underlying tactic is not novel. One of the, I think, frustrations that I've had with some of the policy interventions, that when they're sort of based on the idea that you just disclose this and then people will be able to advocate for themselves. Well, if you're, if the AI is being used, let's say, in the context of hiring, for example, often the only option that you have is to walk away from a job. It's not, you can't meaningfully push back against a possible future employer, or, if you are being evaluated by a bank, you might not have the ability to really push back against the bank's determination without, potentially losing the ability to purchase a house. So that power asymmetry, I think, often gets lost in the conversation. I think it's important to put it back at the center when thinking through, well, how do we push back, or how do we change these conditions?
I will just add to that, sort of with a note that these technologies are extremely costly to develop and to use. And, it can cost up to $100 million to do what they call training run of one of these large models. And a training run is sort of, compute all of the math needed to sort of create a model that can probabilistically create text in response to a prompt, or an image in response to an image prompt, or what have you. $100 million just to create a model, and you may need to do that multiple times as you calibrate it and tune it. That's just one section of the cost of developing these technologies. And I could, there's many more expenses. There's huge amounts of labor needed to effectively tune and train these models so that they don't produce horribly offensive epithets or, other outputs that would make them impermissible for polite liberal business use. That generally employs thousands and thousands of workers from the majority world to note what is impermissible, which is often extremely traumatic language or imagery, feed that into the system and say, no, not this, no, not this. That is a human buffer zone that is created via these often invisibilized laborers to get this technology into a shape where, again, in polite capitalist use, it can perform without causing a PR crisis. So $100 million simply in compute to train, hundreds of thousands, millions and millions of dollars to pay these workers, even though they're paid a very low wage individually. It takes thousands and thousands of them to accomplish this task. and then to use this technology to say, bring everyone an interface for ChatGPT and let them type in their prompts and get responses is also extremely expensive. It takes a lot more computational power to run a model and generate a response than it does to do, say, basic information retrieval in response to a search. So there are estimates now that say that running ChatGPT for a month, letting all of us use it, as Microsoft does for a month, costs, or a week, cost as much as a training run. So, millions and millions of dollars. Why do I bring the economics into it? Well, they are fascinating. They also dictate what's going to be built and who's going to use it or who can afford to use it. So this really gets back to Sarah's point. These are not technologies that we can just afford ourselves of equally. These are technologies that are almost certain to be used on us by those who have the capital and resources to develop or procure them. So they really are technologies of the 1%, of states, of massive institutions. They are not technologies that we can imagine in the current social and capitalist organization of our world could ever be built or developed for the majority of people. So we need to recognize, one, as I pointed out in my intro, that these require concentrated resources only in the hands of a handful of companies. So it's already a paradigm of concentrated power. And because they are so expensive to develop and use, they will remain in the hands of the powerful due to the fact that no one else can afford $100 million for a training run. And, they will be used in ways that map to the imperatives of the powerful, which are usually profit growth, maintaining, the hegemony of empire and those types of things, not, worker well-being, redistribution of resources and things like that. So we need to keep our imaginaries very materially anchored with this technology in particular.
And it's a particularly opaque set of technologies too. There's very strong interest in not being transparent around how these systems are being used. I have spent tons of time running through the business pages of every trade publication I can find and looking at, the earnings decks and everything. And the use cases are not clear. The business models are not particularly clear. And the incentives, I think, are very much set up for a fairly predatory approach to, making back the profit, given the very capital intensive nature of these systems. However, the silver lining point, I think, is that what we do know about artificial intelligence systems, and where we have seen the most successful pushback on the instrumentation and harmful use of AI systems, has come through organizing campaigns. It's not come through, regulatory, there's policy movement for sure. This is a moment where there's activity, but I think meaningful change has been enacted predominantly through, the data labelers who are, training ChatGPT, going and getting headlines in Time Magazine, forming a union. It's come through the WGA setting terms with the studios that narrate that it is the writers, not the studios, that are going to be able to determine where and under what conditions AI is used. And so I think, these are all still small wins, but they are wins that are consequential, and I think point to a set of strategies and tactics that are going to be very necessary in order to both call out and also reshape the way that AI is used in the world, because it is not set up to be used in ways that are going to accrue to the benefit of most of us.
Can I add something here about the PSC itself, our union? CUNY has declared, the university managers, in their way that people teaching should use a new, what's called CMS, computer learning management system. In other words, a new Blackboard that they have to teach through. Well, that's a condition of labor, right? And the new system, I'm assuming, well, I know more than assumptions, but is based on collecting more and more data, both about the students and the faculty, and combining that. It's the combining of data that's fascinating. So groups within the PSC and the PSC itself are fighting back against the mandated use of this technology for teaching. And we've had other fights like this too. Would you like me to call on people now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Because I think answering direct questions will be really, really great. We did have a question in the chat about what is the truth in the world of AI. And I think that was addressed from the beginning of its history. But if you want to say a word or two about that, and then we'll go to Lorraine and Linda Garson and Marcia Newfield as the first three questions.
I feel like the truth question is just a can of worms and is really hard to answer if we just focus on AI or even on technology. I was politicized by 9/11 and the Iraq War, and I deeply remember Judith Miller and the instrumentation of political opinion that happened via the New York Times sort of situating itself as a mouthpiece for the will of the political elite at that time. We see similar happening right now with Gaza and the New York Times, and I think we have a bigger issue than simply that AI distorts truth by creating factually plausible but actually incorrect garbage that is, kind of spreading throughout our networks. The issue is more about concentrated power and the way that information asymmetry and the will to control how and what a subject population thinks, has persisted, since the beginning of state power or sort of centralized control. And that power is now sort of spread between kind of the traditional media outlets, which used to have things like public editors and perhaps some checks and balances, and now coexists with the growing kind of platform companies who are incentivized to sort of, draw attention to their platforms to keep people glued to their platforms so that they click more and more ads. And this has meant that we, the surveillance advertising, the kind of, ability to target types of people based on information about them, such that you hope, sway what they buy or what they think, or otherwise shape their behavior, has become the kind of primary distribution channel for our media and news and, what is or is not a fact. And that is a real issue, particularly because the control over these platforms is in the hands of a handful of companies, largely based on the US West Coast, in an age of rising authoritarianism in the US. So this isn't just an issue of truth. This is really an issue of the power asymmetries constituted by these formations and the age-old desire to placate or sway a population via propaganda.
Thank you. Now, Lorraine Cohn is first, and then Lydia Garrison.
Thank you. I want to build on this theme of the asymmetries of power as the underlying structure which frames the uses of AI. This last week, I gave testimony at City Council on the use of an algorithm for placement of students who require developmental or ESL education. We know that this has always been a very ambiguous and ambivalent response, an area that CUNY has always, in a sense, tried to marginalize. About 6 or 7 years ago, they arbitrarily decided that the old placement methods were no good, which they may not have been, but they then imposed an algorithm. There was virtually no consultation with faculty who teach students in this area. And though it may have some virtues, I'm not saying it's wrong. They've never done research on it to test it. They just rolled it out for the entire university. And people who teach these courses in ESL and developmental reading, writing, and math have expressed real problems with the decision-making process in the community colleges. And they also place, based on the algorithm, people in senior colleges as opposed to community colleges. So I don't know what the implications of that are, but I just want to show how much this algorithm has been used for precisely the purposes of imposing the appearance of rationality
Mhm.
on a qualitative decision.
Wow.
Yes.
Thanks for your testimony, Lorraine.
And I
Lydia?
put in the chat, would love to read the testimony.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you put it in?
I'll try.
Okay. Lydia?
Yeah, I just a couple of things. This is a very interesting, wonderful presentation, so articulate also. There's a couple of things I always think of in terms of this. I don't know if this is peripheral, is the martial applications of this, the military applications of this concern me greatly. And some of the bookie tales we're hearing about, I guess, robot martinets that decide to kill us, on their own volition. So, I mean, I don't know if this is something that you've given much attention to, but I'm always concerned about, because the military has the money to fund a lot of this stuff anyway. That's how we got the internet. So I'm just sort of wondering what your take is on, is that a legitimate fear, I guess I would ask.
Well, this is one of the ways I started labor organizing, was learning that Google had inked a very secretive deal with the Department of Defense to build machine vision, a type of AI for drone targeting. And we learned a couple weeks ago that, in fact, they were using it for drone targeting. They kept saying it was just for surveillance. It is for targeting civilians. And the military application of these technologies is it's already happening. There's some very good and deeply, deeply troubling reporting on the use of AI for targeting in Gaza by the Israeli military that shows that AI is being used not to increase accuracy, but to increase scale. So identifying what used to be a handful of targets, 1 to 2 people a day, has now been increased to 100 or 200, hundreds of people that are then killed, murdered, assassinated on the direction of the AI. So there is no human review, and what is now authorizing killing of often civilians is an algorithmic determination. So what's happening here is very similar to what we just heard with the algorithm used for student placement, in that it's not actually better, more accurate, or more sophisticated. What it is doing is offering plausible deniability and an ability to distance human beings from the responsibility for their actions, in a context where I would argue that is more necessary than it ever has been, and to obfuscate our ability to determine human responsibility by having the dual secrecy of government classification on the one side that comes with inking a military contract, and corporate secrecy on the other, which is how these companies maintain secrecy over their algorithms and infrastructure.
Wow.
There's,
Uh,
oh, sorry.
before I-
go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that that notion of securitization of AI has also been used as a means to try and shut down attempts to regulate the technology. So under the logic that this is critical for our national security, it's critical for our competitiveness against adversary nations, and using that as a means to tactically shut down momentum towards more active regulation of the tech. Sorry, back to you, Jen.
No, terrific. Lorraine Cohn has posted in the chat the testimony as you requested, and that's for everyone. And yes, it would be wonderful before I call on the next couple of speakers that later after the meeting, if the two of you could assemble a short reading list of some of your many publications, particularly about military and political uses. Yeah, Marcia Newfield, you're up next.
Hi, I feel very simple-minded. I mean, I'm really lost. And I printed out the 12-page AI Now summary that Joan sent us. But my basic question is, how do they find out stuff about me when I don't tell them? Now, I understand that they have, it depends on what databases they have access to. So for example, if I make 3 phone calls to Australia, they could find that out and somehow find out what I was interested in about Australia. Now, I know that after sometimes I look up something minor, a household item, I get 12 emails about other household items.
Yeah, right.
Now, how do they get that? I mean, I understand what you said. The high-tech companies have feelers that go out over everything, but it seems, and then they figure it out. That's the AI part, is they figure out how to reduce them to something or other. Is that basically correct? That, like, for example, with the redlining that Joan, I believe, talked about, which is so significant. And I know that they said the basis of redlining was any community that had more than 5% people of color were redlined. Now, how did they find that out? Is that like a cooperation with the census? Is it a cooperation with the banks? I mean, it seems so convoluted and weird, and I don't understand any of it. And I think you should be putting out AI for dummies, and similar to what Barbara Garson did when she traced her money. She did that how does my money, and she took a $10, $20 or an investment, and she traced it all over the economic system. It seems to me that would be helpful, because I'm lost.
I want to say first, that's not a simple-minded question. That's a question even those of us who spend our time in these waters daily continue to ask. It's hard to know exactly where they get each piece of data, or whether they are simply inferring things based on other data using probabilistic models. So, they can buy data from data brokers. Your cell phone carrier may sell data. Your credit card companies sell credit card records. Location data is often available from different cell phone carriers. You can match that with different government databases. You can map that to social media graphs. So knowing that Sarah and Joan and I are all friends, and then looking at public records to understand who our families are, looking at tax records to understand where we're employed. And that's where you need all of this powerful infrastructure, because then you have to store and process that data and turn it into classifications that would put us into different buckets of sort of types of people who want this kitchen appliance or that kitchen appliance, or searched for that and have an income over X and live in neighborhood Y, which was not historically redlined. So we'll assume this person is white, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of data available in disparate sources. And again, because we have no federal privacy law, and the osmotic layers between the different sort of data membranes are so porous, it's very difficult to know how and where all of this data came from. Also because these are private companies, these aren't governments with disclosure requirements. So that is a question we continue to pursue an answer for. But what is at the heart of that question is that we have a handful of companies with the capacity to sort of use that data to classify us and make determinations that effectively rank us in this social order, determine our access to resources, determine the news we see, and other incredibly important things.
And I think often the underlying techniques are often piloted in the context of things like behavioral advertising, where it only has to work well enough to be better than random in trying to get you to click on something or trying to get you to make a purchase, but then might be applied in contexts that are much more like high stakes, whether that's, you know, the access to resources, or whether that's, you know, the making significant determinations about people based on these inference-based techniques, these educated guesses. And so what often gets dropped out is like the threshold of accuracy, or what we're even calling accuracy, like what counts as accuracy in these systems, even as they're being deployed very actively in ways that are quite socially consequential.
So we have 4 hands up, and I'll ask everyone please to make your comments and questions and suggestions brief. Peter Reynes?
Yes, Meredith and Sarah, thank you very much for all those insights. I think your focus seems to be on workplace surveillance and consumer needs, and the impact on consumer purchasing and so on. And you speak of a handful of companies that dominate the system of AI. I know this is not your field country-wise, but I want to raise the question of, you must have thought about the surveillance system of a country like China, where the power of the government that combines political power and capital power has surveilled far beyond the workplace. They've surveilled in the streets and in the homes. Do you see the US Capitol moving in that direction?
I will answer part of that question, then I want to turn it over to Sarah, who's been looking at AI nationalism and particularly the role and specter of China in this debate. I think workplace and non-workplace surveillance is so muddied as to be almost a not so meaningful distinction. Insofar as we carry our devices everywhere, they're often logging information on behalf of our employers. Employers are often able to leverage a lot of information that goes well beyond the workplace. And our public and sort of commercial surveillance apparatuses are often very pervasive. We walk down the street and are profiled by facial recognition cameras. We walk into a store and a facial recognition camera may match us against a database of alleged shoplifters. We move in the world and our location is being logged by commercial vendors via apps that are running in the background on our phone, et cetera, et cetera. However, they are not announced by the state as sort of state mandated population surveillance. So I think we need to be a little bit careful at drawing such hard distinctions between state and government surveillance, particularly when we look at the revelations from the Snowden documents and see that throughout the 2000s, as this surveillance business model was created, the government found many ways to effectively freeload off of commercial surveillance, doing so quietly, but nonetheless getting access to more data than they'd ever had before, often data that it would have been illegal for them to collect themselves. So I'll give that answer to the sort of surveillance practices question, and then I'll turn it to Sarah for sort of to tackle the kind of China versus US dichotomy that arises in this discourse.
Yeah, I mean that specter of China as the surveillance state, I think appears with, growing frequency around artificial intelligence. And as mentioned earlier, often the framing tends to be used as a justification to reduce scrutiny of US based AI firms that are up to many of the same tactics. So I think where this particularly comes into the forefront, there's been two areas. One is there was a very strategically positioned campaign to try and shut down attempts at antitrust intervention that would structurally, intervene in these companies' business models, where you had former defense officials, often who were actively still on the pay books of the big tech firms, saying because of concerns about China, we cannot do anything that's going to perturb our nationalized monopolies, essentially. And then secondarily, on movement on algorithmic accountability or AI accountability regulation. So I think there's both, a lot of reasons to be looking at the surveillance practices that are, already very active within the commercial surveillance realm within the United States, and then also to look at the way that the sort of China frame is strategically deployed to evade accountability for that homegrown surveillance.
Joan, you're muted.
You're muted.
Shame on me, I'm unmuting Nancy, but before I do, I'll say what I said on mute. That Peter's own research is about neoliberalism, and that's essentially what you're talking about, that fuzzy boundary of the state and the corporate. Nancy?
Okay, thank you. What a great presentation. I agree that it would be great to get this out as much as we can. It's so useful. I'm wondering what you think about using the courts to challenge. I mean, I know that civil rights attorneys, one of them being my son, has pursued race and gender and age discrimination cases against Facebook for their advertising. For example, only sending advertising for certain jobs to only men, or sending them to only younger people, or that kind of thing, and making jobs and access to credit and access to housing harder for protected groups. I'm wondering to what extent you think that is a useful approach, an auxiliary approach, or just sort of, what your opinion of that is. Can it be used as one of the tools to challenge the system and to impose or reimpose those protected groups' welfare?
Sarah, apologies, I'm working through my thoughts on this one. Do you have any, Sarah?
I think similarly, just trying to think through. I
guess maybe I can just come back to some of the sort of economic points I was making around the cost of these technologies. And perhaps it is not an issue of technological possibility or a hypothetical benevolent use, and more an issue that those in the position of building and using these technologies via their resources and positions of power are simply not incentivized to do that.
Right, they're using the algorithms and selling these algorithms to companies that are wanting to maximize their contact with either workers or borrowers or whatever it may be
Right.
that they feel will be more successful. So the algorithms are discriminatory.
Yeah, and discriminatory economically, which is currently legal in our country, right? If you're poor, you don't get. If you're rich, you get. But of course, economic discrimination it is and has been since before the founding of our country. Sorry, but sometimes it does feel like a company. Has been racialized, so those things are inextricable given that history. I also think there is a question of like what the way they could be used with the subjunctive emphasized in a hypothetical world where there was enough incentive to build $100 million technologies to better allocate welfare would effectively be for some kinds of means testing, right? And is means testing the best way to allocate resources, or has it been shown over and over again to bury more resources in the process that could then be, simply given to people for ultimately less expense?
Great question, Nancy. And Diane, we have time for 2 more?
I think we can, yes.
Okay, so Robert, Bob Cohn, I need to ask you to unmute. There we go.
Okay. Have you done research on use of AI by private medical insurance companies to deny coverage? They're very interested in that since they're trying to put the retirees into a private insurance rather than on Medicare.
There have been a couple of, I think, useful studies that have looked at essentially they can all be bucketed under like algorithm washing techniques. For example, the use of like AI-based systems to make determinations that affect the quality of care that somebody receives. And then when you look under the hood at the like variables that an insurer selected, they've made assumptions that have discriminatory outcomes that disproportionately deny needed care to Black patients, for example, at higher rates than white patients. So I'm happy to send along some of those studies, but I think it's an area that could definitely use further work and further scrutiny.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last is the name is Palmer and Francis. It sounds like a business, but I can't see you, so please unmute.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to unmute. No, it's not a business. We husband and wife. Palmer was the retiree and I'm in another field. I see the positive aspects of AI, but I also see a very strong negative, and it's very frightening. I go on social media and I see a video of some celebrity making this 10-minute speech on something, and they never did it. It is just all AI. Now, isn't there any way that there should be guidelines or a legal control of AI? This is basically something what Nancy was talking about.
I will let Sarah answer this since Sarah is much closer to the day-to-day policy discussions that could be capable of answering your question.
I think the emphasis on the could. So yes, I think we're going to be hearing a lot more in an election year about exactly this kind of usage of AI. Often the remedies that are put forward are things like put a watermark on it so that people know if it's AI. The underlying techniques to make that possible are flawed, and also it's fundamentally reliant on this idea that like each of us as individuals need to take on responsibility for addressing this when, as we know, these are technologies that are motivated by companies that are pursuing profit. And so, pushing towards interventions that are more structural, that tackle the business model that makes it easy to be producing these kinds of systems, I think is likely a much stronger path for intervention. And also looking to how fake and doctored AI-based images and videos get distributed, I think is also a big part of it. It's, you know, very reliant on that surveillance-based business model for all kinds of communication where, you know, you can target people to a high level of precision with, you know, false ads or false videos. All of that sort of is prime for this kind of behavior. And so in thinking through paths for intervention, that's certainly the much harder path. It's the one that has a more direct impact on the bottom line of these very big firms. But if you want to actually make a meaningful dent in the problem space, like that's where you would need to be heading rather than just, you know, putting a watermark on some of the material that gets generated, and likely a lot falls through the cracks.
I see in the chat lots and lots of messages thanking the two of you for such a well-rounded talk and giving us so much information that we seem to be grasping. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over to Diane and Sarah and Meredith. You are welcome to stay and listen to our dilemmas facing our union.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you to the speakers. As you can see, everyone was very well informed now, right? Everybody feels less mystified, it's demystified with all of the, I think, anxieties that come with AI. Thank you very much. And if you want to, of course, you can access this online because we're recording. So if you want to go back and look, we can do that. That's great. I see,
Diane,
yes,
I'm
sure.
sorry, it's Joan again.
Yep.
I did a very bad, well, I did a faux pas. I did not tell Sarah and Meredith we were recording, and my apologies to you.
It said so at the beginning. It says
Yes,
you're not
it did
recording this
say so,
session,
but I
so
didn't tell
we
you in
understood.
advance.
You
It'll
have to
be on the
click.
website, the PSC website.
At the beginning, you have to click that you know it's being recorded to continue.
I'm the note taker.
Thank you very much. I see that Debbie's here. I don't see her right now on the Zoom, but I know she's here somewhere because Debbie's going to give us an update on the Medicare struggle. Debbie, are you around?
I'm here. Whoops.
Okay.
There we go. There is not much of an update this month. There are several lawsuits, the main one being the city's challenge to Judge Frank having put a hold on implementing Medicare Advantage for all New York City retirees. That challenge is in the appellate division of the New York State court system. There have been submissions in writing to the appellate division, and oral arguments are scheduled for March 21st. I think that's the date. That would suggest to me that it's unlikely there will be any decision from the appellate division, which is a panel of judges, until sometime in April at the earliest, at which point whoever loses, whether it's the municipal retiree organization or the city, will no doubt appeal to the Court of Appeals, which is the top level of the state court system. So nothing is likely to change in the next few months, I think, on Medicare Advantage. There are two other lawsuits that are relevant to retirees. One is a challenge to Judge Frank's ruling that senior care cannot, and the city cannot charge co-pays. That is also sort of in the courts, and as far as I know, going to the appellate division, but I'm not sure exactly of the status of that. The third relevant suit is at the Court of Appeals level, so that's the highest level, which goes back several years and is a challenge to Judge Frank's, an earlier ruling of Judge Frank, which said that the city cannot charge a co-premium if the premium is less than the HIP HMO rate. This had to do with, if you recall, initially when the city offered Medicare Advantage with Emblem and Anthem, employees were being offered the opportunity to buy senior care by paying the premium, which was a little less than $200. That was challenged by the Municipal Retirees Organization, and the judge ruled that no, they couldn't make retirees pay that premium because it's less than the HMO rate, which the administrative code says is what the city must pay. The HMO rate is approximately $800. Anyway, I know I've now confused everybody, but the point is that everything is still in the courts and undecided, and they're unlikely to be actionable decisions in the next couple of months before, I think, realistically, before the summer. So, stay tuned. We'll keep you informed. We are watching the docket. Just for your information, the RFP for the active employee health plan is still being debated between the MLC and the city. And that has not moved forward. So it most likely, the original target date for implementing a new health plan for active employees and pre-65 retirees, those are not yet eligible for Medicare, was July 1. That date is no longer relevant. As soon as the parties come to some conclusion about what kind of plan they're going to offer, we will let you folks know, and it will affect the pre-65 retirees, but it won't be July 1. Most likely, at this point, it would be January 1, I would think, of 2025. That's the update. It's all in the courts. You're on mute, Diane.
Sorry, John has a question about if there's a plan B if we lose in the courts. Not really.
I don't have a plan B, but I suspect there will be a plan.
Well, I would guess organize is the plan B.
Organize is the plan. Stay informed and organize is right.
All right, Carmen asked, what is the status of the co-pays now? We don't pay co-pays now.
We don't pay co-pays now, right? The judge ruled that we couldn't pay them now.
And if they try to ask you for a co-pay, we should politely tell them that that's inappropriate. Yes.
Yes.
Any other questions about the updated information? We're sort of just waiting for something to happen. Yes. Okay. Marcia wanted to announce something. Marcia, you there? About the working theater? Is she still there? I don't see her. Marcia Newfield? I don't see her.
She's still there. I unmuted. I asked her to unmute.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, well, are you going to send out that blast? Usually we go to a working theater performance as ensemble, as a group, and we've picked April 13th, 2 p.m. to see their new play called Fish, which is about a high school situation, with a teacher and a student being caught in the strangulation of underfunding and oversize. So are you going to send that so that we can get $25 tickets? You can, if you use the code, what is it, working 25?
We will send that out in an email blast in the next week or
Okay,
two.
beautiful. So I just would like, we've done this for many years now, where we all go at one time and we see one of their featured performances, and they're usually good, well worth seeing. So please respond to the blast that you're going to get, use the code, and pay $25 and come and see your friends and see the theater with your friends.
Okay, there's also people who are urging us as individuals, if they want to make contributions to the Organization of Public Service Retirees, helping them to fight for public Medicare, for the Medicare fight that Debbie was talking about. So you can do that as an individual and probably through their website. Any other quick announcements for us before we?
Diane, there was also a question about what's up with the UFT, but I think they really mean what happened with a $2,000 a month donation from DC 37 Retirees Association. So
Yes, does somebody want to do a quick update on that for us? Basically, I think Eileen would probably be best to tell us what happened there. Is Eileen still here? Eileen Moran?
well, I can talk briefly about that and
Go
unless
ahead.
she wants to. We actually sent a letter, which I can share with you, to the DC 37 Retirees Association. The DC 37 Retirees Association is an independent association. They're not part of DC 37, and so they have control of their own funds. And they had been making a donation of $2,000 a month to the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees. And they were recently, I think it was last week, taken over by their parent group, which is the American Federation of State, County and Municipal Retirees, and which said that they had not been paying, they had not been filing their nonprofit tax forms to the federal government. But everyone really believes it was because they were making this $2,000 a month donation. So there is going to be a demonstration outside their offices at, I believe it's 75 Maiden Lane, Wednesday at 11 o'clock, if people want to show their support. And I will share the letter that we sent to them as soon as I can do this.
In the meantime, I think John has his hand up. John Hyland?
I take it down.
Okay.
Bonnie just mentioned the rally on Wednesday. I just wanted to make sure that was mentioned.
Yeah, if I got that,
It's very important
information wrong,
to
please
support the
correct me.
DC 37 folks.
Also, I see someone has written in a chat, I think their question is not about DC 37, but why the Retiree Association can't make a contribution to the legal fund. And I think they really mean for the PS. If I've got Sarah's question correctly, I think she's asking about why the PSC can or can't contribute to the legal action. And I think we have numerous times encouraged individuals to do that. Unlike us, and I think Diane, it might be timely for us to read the statement that the EC discussed at its last executive committee about the difference between the PSC's ability to do this and the Retiree Association of DC 37, which is totally independent of DC 37. So take
Yes,
it away.
our budget, we pay dues to the PSC property.
Diane, can I read what the explanation that we came up with?
Go ahead, Bonnie.
So this question keeps coming up, so we thought it would be helpful if we just sort of clearly wrote what the problem is and what the issue is and what our position is. And that is that unlike the DC 37 Retirees Association, which is an independent group, we are a chapter of the PSC, and we do not have our own funds independent of the PSC. Our dues go to the PSC, not to the retirees chapter, and our monies are mingled with the dues from in-service members. Only the PSC can decide to use dues money to support an outside organization. We have a chapter budget, which is allocated per chapter member, and it's meant to cover routine expenses like the printing of the chapter newsletter. Anything other than that would have to be approved by the PSC Executive Council. The PSC has in fact spent a considerable amount of the union's money and time on the Medicare Advantage struggle. It is paying 3 part-time consultants who work exclusively on healthcare issues. These consultants, plus the PSC Executive Director, the Legislative Director, James Davis, the PSC President, and others, including members of the Retirees EC, have all been meeting regularly for over a year. They met weekly, actually, on the Medicare Advantage crisis. PSC has also spent money on our own outside legal counsel to advise us on how we may legally fight against the city's MA plan, and has recently filed an amicus brief in the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees lawsuit. The healthcare struggle, as you may have heard, has now moved beyond the members of our chapter because the city and the MLC are negotiating a new health insurance plan for active members. That will, because the city insists on healthcare savings, most likely reduce benefits for active PSC members. The same group that has been meeting for 3 years about Medicare Advantage has now been expanded to work on this attack on active members' healthcare. And that healthcare working group continues to monitor the MA issue closely. If the PSC gives money to the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees, we have no control over what they use it for. In the past, leaders of the organization have attacked different unions and their presidents, including our own. They have sometimes praised the PSC and other times misrepresented what our president and executive director said. Whatever we may personally feel about other unions and their presidents, as a union, we cannot support this kind of action. But as individuals who are fighting to keep our traditional Medicare, most of us actually on the EC and probably on this meeting, most of us have contributed to the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees because we wholeheartedly support their lawsuits and we need them to succeed. And we urge you to do the same. Contribute to the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees so these lawsuits can continue. They have done a tremendous job for us, and we appreciate it.
And somebody
I
wants.
hope I didn't take too much of your time, but I wanted to be clear.
Yeah, so somebody wants, and we think you should put it someplace where people can go and take a less quick view of this. Can we put it
I tried to put in the chat, they said it was too long. I'll break it up. And if I don't succeed, if anybody writes to us, we'll send it to them.
Put it, you can write to our email, the retiree email, and we'll send it to you that way, okay? And that could
Why
be.
don't you put it on our website, the retiree chapter website?
We'll think about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure technically where we would do that and how we would do that, but Bonnie would be able to, we'll figure out a way to make it easily accessible to you all, even if it's in a link or something like that, okay? Any other announcements about upcoming events that we need to know about from anywhere? Okay, so we do urge you to make that donation if possible, if at all possible for you. And I guess we are adjourned.
Well, wait, let me finish putting the message in here, because I am getting somewhere. It's slow.
And I suggest you go out and spend some of this beautiful day, because it's a little sort of spring-like outside today.
We're all set. Drive safely.
Okay. Any other announcements? We urge you to go to Marsha's working theater event. When she posts, we'll post that somewhere for you too, probably in an email blast.
That's done.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.